What's up, you guys? Thank you so much for tuning in to Big Tech Talks. I'm here as always with Pavel. How you doing,
Hi
Pavel?
guys, I'm very well. I mean, it's super hot today in San Francisco. Exceptionally, it's never that hot, but yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I would say it's hot over here too in LA. Today we're going to be kind of piggybacking off of our last topic. Last time we talked about product design and the product design process, and now we're going to go a little bit deeper into that so that we can better understand preparing the types of research that we're going to do for our users. Mainly, we're going to be talking about questionnaires and how to develop a really good questionnaire so that we know what kind of products our users are going to use and how they're using them and things like that. So, Pavel, go ahead and get us started with that.
All right, so user research. That's when we left it the last time at the last episode, and that's why I suggested to doing this subject next. So the user research process, and we're gonna describe it on an example of a survey. So you start the user research process by defining the research goals. This is very important step that you should never ever skip. Then the next part is preparing research plan. After you have your research plan, then you're conducting the actual research. And after the research is complete, you perform the data analysis and you present the results to your decision makers and other stakeholders. So that's it, in short, the process you take to conduct the user research. But now let's get some into details of the steps. So I would like to start with how to define the research goals. I mentioned these are very important. They should never be skipped. So what I mean by that is you have to know what decision you want to make. So you conduct user research because you want to make a decision, right? So if you want to make a decision, you need to have the data. That's how decision-making process works. You have a problem, you want to make a decision, but to make the informed decision, you need data to understand the consequences of your decision. So hence, you're performing user research. So after that,
it kind of seems like more and more, like, as more data is being collected every year, it's getting easier for businesses to collect data, and more people are just kind of giving away their data in some ways. This is probably one of the biggest first steps for a business at this point, right? Because we can have this much data.
Well, so in this, so yeah, so you have two types of data you can have. Is the primary and secondary data. So you are mentioning the secondary data. So this is the data that were already collected by either this organization, your organization, or another organization like a government agency or like census or another research center. So you may use secondary data that were already collected, but sometimes you may not be able to extract the right data you need to form a decision. In that case, you still want to perform a research yourself. And that's how you collect the primary data.
Got it. And the primary data is like directly getting this from somebody, right? Like
yes, that means you collected this data to solve this particular problem. Right. So after you had your when you define the decision you want to make, when you know and understand the decision you want to make, then you define the research problem. But actually, it's usually like a number of research problems. This will help you build the questions so you can answer those research questions. This is a very important part of the preparation for your research. You have to define as many research questions as you need to help you make your decision. Sometimes the problem may be more ambiguous, like when you know that there is a problem with a login form, for example, on your website. So you gotten into the Google Analytics, and then you notice that there is a 70% abandonment rate in your login form. So you know that the problem is there, but it's not clear where is it. So you still can formulate the questions according to this analysis that you have performed before.
Okay. And so it's kind of like we're using our secondary data to help us start to formulate what kind of primary data a little bit, right? Because if 70% people are leaving, that's kind of like secondary, right?
So this is still primary data. You performed this research. Performed this research. So you looked into your Google Analytics, your raw data, and then you realized, oh, I have 70% abandonment rate in the login form. So I understand. So I see there is a problem somewhere, but I don't really know how to particularly formulate the research questions just yet, because I don't know really what the problem is. I know the problem exists, because otherwise the rate would be much lower. But I did not necessarily know just yet how to define those questions. It can be more ambiguous. What is important to formulate those questions properly, so they will help you make a decision in the future.
So now that we figured out the problem, we kind of want to start getting answers. What kind of tools are we going to use so that we can actually start solving these problems?
Okay, so according to Philip Kotler, who is known for popularizing the definition of marketing mix, there are three main categories for research methods, which is observation, survey, and experiment. So in each category, there are different tools that we can use to gather primary data. So the most common tool for observation research is telemetry data, like Google Analytics. We often use these tools to learn why something is happening. So like I just mentioned, we realized that we have a problem with the login form. We saw that something is happening, but we don't really know what exactly is happening. We understand that we have a problem, but we don't really, most likely we won't get information about what the problem exactly is and how to fix it with this kind of data. Then you have survey research, which is usually used to collect descriptive information. We use it to learn about people's motivations and attitudes, like why people don't like our products or how they would react to a change in our product, like design of our website. And the third group, the experimental research, is used to learn why something happened. So the mechanism of the experiment is about isolating strictly defined groups of objects, and I'm going to explain you in a second what does it mean, influencing them in different ways, checking independent factors and looking for differences in the reactions of particular groups. So what it means, isolating strictly defined groups of objects. So isolating means that we only perform an experiment on one group. So imagine we're taking a login form from your website, and we make some changes to it, but nothing else is changing on your website. So you isolate the experiment from the environment. So any variable is only in that environment. We influence them in different ways, as I just recall the definition. We influence them, so we create a variable, something change in different variants of the experiment. Then you collect the data, so you can check how those variables influenced user behavior.
So this is kind of almost like similar to like A to B testing. Right?
This is A/B testing is an experiment.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Cool. So like if you're running an ad and you try two different ads and you make small changes for maybe the color of something, the placement, right? These are all things you would use. All the things you would tweak.
That's right. That's like the basic example of an experiment.
So, Pawel, how do we actually start preparing this research?
Okay, so let's jump into the research. So how to prepare a research? Let's do this while we will prepare the actual study. Let's experiment. Let's do something live in here. So I have an app. The app is a developer tool used during an API development process. The app allows the user to make HTTP requests to an API endpoint. And we already discussed that, you know what that is in the previous episodes. So let's focus on this part. So let's describe a decision problem. So what's our decisions going to be? I actually had this specific use case. So users, I have an actual API testing tool. And users actually started asking me to implement protocol buffers in the applications. Have you ever heard about protocol buffers?
I don't know what those are.
It's a protocol of sending data from client to server and from server to client. So it's just a very efficient protocol for exchanging data. It's developed by Google a couple of years ago, probably like a decade ago. So decision problem, should we invest resources into developing support for protocol buffers? I think that would be quite good. Decision problem. So how are we going to do this? I don't know the data. I don't know whether we actually should invest our money, our resources, which is money, the developers, designers, product managers to actually implement protocol buffers in the application. I don't understand what is the consequence of having support for protocol buffers. I don't know what is the consequence of not having it. So for that, I'm gonna conduct a user research. So in normal company, I would go to our research department. I mean, big tech company, not a normal company, a big tech company that actually has a research department. And I would team up with a researcher and I would explain him the topic that we are being asked by our users to implement protocol buffers. But hey, there's some problems. And these are going to be our research problem. We don't understand segments of users who are using protocol buffers. So this is our first research problem. Understand customer segments expressing the most need or interest in using protocol buffers. Then what I would tell the researcher is I need to understand user needs, scenarios, workflows, and pain points for when they are working with protocol buffers. And that's another research problem that would help me make the decision. And then another research problem, I would say that would be, I don't really have a deep understanding of how to use protocol buffers in an API development process. So to design an application for developers to use this specific feature, I have to have a deep understanding of this workflows, of what they are actually doing. So that's going to be another research problem. So these three research problems I just described, we're going to use it. Actually, I have an idea. You're going to use it to define questions, and we're gonna do this in a second.
Okay.
If you are fine with that, you're gonna be a little bit creative in here.
Okay, I think I can manage.
So, in an actual user research, because it's actually a science to keep the rigor of user research, you would formulate a research hypothesis. So my hypothesis would be our users need to support protocol buffers when developing an API. And another hypothesis would be this should be a relatively low usage feature. I have no idea. I just have a prediction, having my intuition that these two things should happen, that we should implement protocol buffers but they are not necessarily like the first choice for the users. So you're gonna construct questions for this survey, and I'm gonna be evaluating you.
Okay.
And I will evaluate you, but I'm gonna help you actually to understand how to build this questionnaire to either conform or reject the hypothesis. So the research that we are going to do will be a survey, which is the reason for this episode. So I decided that the best tool to learn answers to this to my decision problem is to conduct a survey. So we will be asking users to conduct the survey through application's internal messaging system. So there is a notification in the application, so the user can click on the notification and see what's new, whatever. And this is when we ask the user to take part in the survey. If users are not going to respond to that notification, we're gonna send that notification 2 days later or something like that. So this is also like a part of the description of your research plan. How you're gonna contact your users, how the research is gonna look like, how it's gonna be based. So there is before we jump into the questions, there is one more thing that we need to define for our users. Is the sample. So we have to define the population. Who is our population? Who we're gonna ask to conduct the research? To participate in the research. So the population, the general population, the most general, is API developers. Then our base sample, is another scientific term, it's API developers using my application, which is the API testing tool. Then the sample size is about 10% of our users, but max 1,000. So usually you conduct a study on about 10% of the population, but you don't take more than 1,000 participants.
Just mostly because oh, go ahead.
Mostly because it won't really change. You won't really get more accurate responses or results from the survey. 1,000 is considered like enough sample for any population.
Okay.
And finally, you define the sample's participants, which is users who work with APIs that use the protocol buffers. And this is the last part, the sample participation. So as you may have noticed, we are actually like going down from general population to smaller population to very specific population. And this most specific population is the users who work with APIs that use protocol buffers.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are ready to start asking questions, actually defining questions we're going to ask our participant. So this is where I would like you to start thinking about these questions. I'm gonna help you by saying that usually you start from the most general questions, and while you progress in the survey, you go down to more detailed questions. So, what would you think would be a first question?
Thinking about like other questionnaires I've taken, I'd say like something general, like I don't know, like gender and age, just to kind of get them clicking, I guess, and just to start it off. Maybe that's useful at some point.
I mean, sure. One of our research questions was to understand customer segments. So customer segments is a group, isolated group of users. So one of group would be males of age between 25 and 49. For example, if that's how you define a segment. It would be a good question to collect in your survey, in this particular survey, but I'm not entirely sure if asking it upfront is the best placement of that question. So the participants are more likely to abandon the survey when we start with personal questions. So this question should be asked at the end. So how many times have you ever you probably saw this kind of personal question in a survey, but I don't think you have saw it very often at the beginning of the survey, most likely at the end.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I usually see that at the end. I actually want to ask too, when they get the survey, is it good to have like a title for the survey? Is it good to give them like the people, answering, should they know to what extent these are about, or are they just going to get something general like, hey, we're going to ask you about protocol buffers. Here's a questionnaire.
I wanted to actually mention that after we're gonna go through a question, but sure. So when you're conducting the actual research, when you have those questions ready, you start the survey by exactly explaining what this survey is about. Usually tell them the goal of this research is to understand how you use protocol buffers in your everyday API development. We want to learn this, and this. We're going to use this data, this, and this, like to make a decision whether this is something that we can implement in our application. You are being very upfront so the users can participants, not users, can actually understand what is the problem that you are trying to solve. And usually you state like how long it's going to take and what they can expect.
Okay, got it.
So another question. What do you think would be your first question then?
Well, we're talking about protocol buffers, and I don't know how often those are used. So you might just ask the user or the participant, have you used protocol buffers in the last recently or something?
Okay, that would be the question that I would probably start with. So did you use protocol buffers in an API that you developed in a last 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever? And that would be like a yes, no questions. So it is a good question to start your research because of the defined sample participants. So our sample participants is users who work with APIs that use protocol buffers. So if they didn't use protocol buffers, there is no point for them to continue the questionnaire, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to answer those questions. So if they answer no, that they didn't use in that period of time, then you can actually close the survey and thank them for participating. But this survey is not for them, because we won't be able to get meaningful data. And there is a reason why we usually mention in a period of time. So first of all, this user should understand what the time range we are talking about, what we are asking them to remember. It's much harder to remember what you have done 2 years ago or 10 years ago. So if the question would be, did you use protocol buffers in your API? Then the question would be, when? Recently? Ever? Once in my life? I mean, I used protocol buffer like 10 years ago, but I'm not entirely sure if that knowledge is gonna help you somehow. So yeah, you define usually the time range.
Got it. And then afterwards, right, you'd probably want to know how many times they've used it, or like how often they're using it. Because they might have used it like one time in the 6 months. It's like, well, you don't want to develop something that, put too much effort into something that people are using once a year or twice a year.
So yeah, that would be a good question, actually. So a question something like, how often did you work on developing an API that uses protocol buffers in the last 6 months? Again, time range. So, and then you can have a range of answers, like 1 to 2, then 3 to 5 times. Let's say it's just, examples from the top of my head, then 5 to 10 and more than 10. So we gather this kind of results, I need this particular answers that I just said, 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 10, and more than 10. So we can compare later these numbers and extract an average, for example, just to understand how often our users would work with protocol buffers.
Got it.
Then it's essential to add a general option to your answer. So if you have options, whether it's a single option or multiple options to select from the user, it's good to have a general options like other, or in our case, more than 10, that just classify as everything else, just to give a user a way to answer otherwise to your other questions, even if it's not really relevant as much to your question, research question, like more than 10, it doesn't really matter whether it's gonna be 500 or 50. It's a lot. Like in API development world, it's a lot. That means that you are actually using most likely those APIs like almost every day. So it doesn't really make as much of a difference if you ask between 10 and 50, and then between 51 and 200 and so on and so on. No, more than 10 is enough. That would give you enough information. So yeah, so more. So do you remember your questions, research question that we want to answer? So
yeah, well, so, you know, ultimately they're working for a business and they're trying to use that API to improve the business in some way. So you might ask them like, what are the business goals for this API, right?
Okay, sure. You may ask them what would be the business goal, so you can understand the workflows, the reasoning why they're working with this API. And that would be a good question to answer. But now a counter question. Are these users, because we are talking about API developers, people who are developing APIs, are these participants, gonna understand what you are asking? Do they understand business goals for those APIs?
Well, I thought maybe, but I mean, probably not as well as like the manager, right? Like, or someone like higher up, like they just get kind of told more what to do, I guess.
So usually developers get an API specification and product requirements. They are not interested in business requirements. They are interested in what their product manager gives them, which is the product requirements and the specification. And they develop software for that specification. So they probably wouldn't actually know what the original business justification for the API was. So I wouldn't say that it would be the best question to ask.
Got it. Okay. So it would have to be questions more specified about the API, right? Like that's the thing they're going to want to, we're going to want to know more about, like, I don't know, making it API faster, or like, I don't know, lowering the cost of it.
So another question I would ask them, maybe it would work. I would have to conduct a short study just to confirm that. Maybe you would ask them, what do you think these APIs goals are? Or maybe split it into different questions. Like if you are talking about like technological aspects of an API, like performance, scalability, then you can ask an engineer. But the business questions, like lowering the costs of running an API, that is not something that engineers are particularly interested by. This is something that they are interested because their product manager told them that they have to lower the cost of an API, of running an API. So maybe you can split it into different questions and ask it differently. But again, you have to always match the question with your target audience. So you have to be sure that people you will ask these questions actually understand what the question is and what can be potential answer.
Got it. Okay. Maybe another kind of question too would be like, we're talking about protocol buffers. Like, maybe we should just like ask them really quickly, like, do you want support for protocol buffers? Like, should we add that? Like, just straight up, is that necessary?
So I'm assuming that would be a yes/no question, a closed question.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You could potentially add this question, and I see why you would do that. But given our research questions, would this actually got you any closer to answering any of the question? And let me remind you, our questions is the understanding the segments, understanding user needs and pain points, and to deepen the understanding of workflows with protocol buffers. Do you think you would?
Oh, isn't that a need? Do they need the support for the protocol?
So that's the actual that's the research goal, to understand whether they actually need it. But the user likely won't actually be able to answer this objectively. They would likely say, yes, of course, I'm gonna need this feature, and they never gonna use this feature again, because as a user, you want to have more features in your applications. But it doesn't really mean that they actually gonna use it. So that's why you wouldn't like to ask this kind of questions to your users.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Maybe then we could ask something like, what are the tools that they use to test those APIs with the protocol buffer?
Okay, that sounds very reasonable. So I would make this a multi select option. So I would add to the end of this question, select all that apply, or select max 3 or whatever. And then I would list options. Like on this market, you would put options like, what is the Postman, Swagger, Insomnia, POW, Thunder Client, and so on and so on. Don't forget to put other, just to have an option that you didn't think about. That's like a standard thing. When you have one or multiple options, you always put other. The fallback option that you can select when any other option doesn't work. So you can, when you select an other, then you can specify what you have in mind. Maybe there is another application that your users are using that you can learn from, but you weren't aware that it even exists. So yeah, this is actually a good question. And also will tell you which application is a leader in your market, so you can learn from there, just to see what kind of solutions they introduce in their application, what kind of workflows, and so on, so on. So yeah, that was a very good question to ask.
So maybe a good question as well might be like, how useful are these API testers like that you're using? Like, maybe which ones you're using the most often?
Okay. This is a question that you would ask very often in every survey, but here's one challenge to this question. You used useful. How useful is the application? This already suggests the answer. This is a leading question. You always have to avoid leading questions like fire when you describing a survey, because it can potentially, because it's a leading question, it could potentially influence the answer. You're asking how useful it is.
Got it. So it's assuming that it is, yeah, because how useful it is, that means to some degree it is useful. It's just either
exactly.
Got it. So you'd want something like I don't know, like what do you call those scales? Like the
Likert scale.
Likert scale. Yeah, right. Go from like least, like not useful, neutral, all the way to like super useful, right?
Yeah, so usually you have 5 or 7-point Likert scale, when you would pull not useful, neutral, and very useful. But the question, you would have to think about the question differently. So you can instead ask like something like, please correct me if I'm wrong, you are English native. Please evaluate the use of the application you use the most often. Something like that. Not using the useful question, just to asking them to evaluate how they feel about their application.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. How would you express your feelings about this application? Yeah. And then,
Sure.
what's your opinion? What are your thoughts on this application? Could it be that simple? What are your thoughts on this application? And then just have the questions there not very useful.
As long as they will, given the question, they give you the right answer. I mean, they understand what you are asking, and
Mhm.
2, you won't lead to the answer, then should be good.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so what else? I think we're gonna be wrapping up. We won't be actually conducting like creating all the questions for the survey. That would be like probably 60 questions or so. So probably let's just get like 2-3 more, and then we're gonna start wrapping up.
So maybe another question might be, what are like we've talked about this before, like pain points. Like, what are the problems that happen when a developer, API developer, typically works with protocol buffers? That would be good, right?
Yeah, so that's directly answers to one of the research questions. So there was the second question was about workflows and pain points. So that would directly answer your question about the pain points. So what you can do is you can define a list of predictable answers for this question. So let's say the question would be, what are the common problems when working with protocol buffers? So you can compile a list of all possible answers that you can think of that are possible for the user. And you can ask to select as many as they possibly can think of. But usually you reduce the number of choices to like 3, most likely, maybe 5, when you're asking them to limit. So this way they can pick which are most important to them. This way you can also get the gradation. So how important these 3 are to them as a pain points. So then you can add different options, like, I don't know, defining data schemas, or learning about protocol buffers. Yeah, how you start with working with protocol buffers, or I don't know, changing a schema in an existing API is actually kind of problematic with protocol buffers, and so on and so on. You can add a number of answers.
Okay.
But then you also, I mentioned that a couple of times, but you also have to add other option. If there is another option that you haven't think about, and I can guarantee you there are always going to be another options that you didn't, as a researcher, you didn't think about, but they would think about. So you always leave a space for a user answer.
Okay, got it. So like, on top of that, we'd want to know, like, because we're asking like, what are these problems? Maybe we'll ask them also, like, how would they fix them, so that we can get an idea of like different strategies, maybe, and just ways that developers think about it.
Okay, so that would be actually a separate question. That would be an open-ended question that you ask the user of, for example, how would you fix those problems? Which is what you said. That wouldn't be the last option, but that would be of the previous question. Mm-hmm. That would be like another question you would ask. So how would you fix those problems? The main problem that you selected, if that's one choice, or those problems that you describe. This way you can learn more how users think about working with protocol buffers, how what is their attitudes towards working with protocol buffers and the applications they're working with. So they see some pain points, and they can actually tell you how they think this problem should be fixed. So if your users think this way, that means that likely you should be considering fixing this problem this way, because this is what they expect. This is their mental model.
Do you typically see a lot of like open-ended questions in a survey, like in a 60-question survey? What is the percentage, would you say, is like open-ended versus more of these kind of multiple choice type?
Good question. So you don't really see that many open questions. So first of all, participants don't usually like them. They are either left out, or if they are required, then you have higher abandonment rate of your survey, because the participant has to focus on the answer, have to type in the answer. You don't really do. And also, you as a researcher, you have to analyze all of it and compile the answer from those open questions. And this is not easy. You introduce a lot of bias to the results of your research by analyzing open questions. So surveys are great to collect both qualitative data and quantitative data. So quantitative as numbers or user choices that you can compare, and then qualitative as the opinions. But usually the opinion part is much, much less. This is questions like, what else would you like to tell us about? I don't know. In our case, that would be the problem with working with protocol buffers. Or did we forget to ask about something that you would like to tell us about? And this is where you could add the open question.
Got it.
But you usually, as a researcher, you are trying to reduce the number of open questions, because it's longer to fill up the form. It takes a much more cognitive effort from the user, from the participant, and increases your abandonment rate. However, it also gives the user an ability to describe the problem deeper that you haven't thought about that way before. And usually you make them optional.
Got it. And it makes sense to put it kind of more towards the end, because now at this point they've been thinking about it for the last several dozen questions, and now their brain's kind of geared towards it. So now they're ready to answer a more complicated question, right?
Yes. And also you would put them at the end of each section of questions, like when you don't want to ask about specific area that you are researching, like pain points. After you finish your all quantitative questions, then you can ask open-ended question, like, did we ask about everything? Maybe there is something more you can tell us about it.
Gotcha. Cool. And then seems like that's start to wrap up.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up. So now you can ask your finishing questions, like to build your audiences.
Gotcha. What's your gender? What's your age? Can we put that back in now, or were we forgetting that?
Yes. I mean, if the gender is important to know, then yes, you can put your gender. I don't know if I would put gender in this particular question, because does it really influence the decision whether you should implement protocol buffers in an API testing tool? No, not really. But, or I don't know, a marketing or whatever. I don't think they're gonna use this kind of information. But however, you do want to define the segment. So what you can ask them is about what size of your organization is, to understand whether you are these people who are using protocol buffers, either are they like one person company organization, or they like small companies, or maybe they are enterprises with 20,000 people. So you understand what level of enterprise you are talking about, whether you have to follow more rigorous standards, or are you targeting more, loose environments? Or I don't know what another question possibly you could ask them. It would be education level. so you can adjust your language when you build the UI. I mean, when you're building an UI, when you're designing an UI, usually try to target an 8th grader with your language.
We know how much 8th graders are using APIs.
But it may tell you, I mean, you may collect this data, so I don't know, the marketing team can craft the specific message to your users. I don't know, for example.
Would it also be helpful to know, right? Like, let's say there's a feature that's only used by people at a doctorate level. Maybe it's like a very, I mean, like it's a certain tool that's only built by people who are at a very high level, and they're the ones that, they're a rare group that use it. I don't know.
That would most likely be the worst user interface I ever saw. That's a kind of interface that a person who doesn't understand it, like never been in that environment and don't understand the context, they would never be able to use this tool, which is kind of silly.
Wait. I think we're thinking of two different things. I'm saying that the tool, like let's just say buffers were only used by people who, it's I'm just thinking of like all the different business tools that need to be used. Maybe it's like a very high level or a low level business tool, like a tool that's so rarely used and it's so like precise, or it's so important that only a few people, are even smart enough to even work with it. It's like asking someone, if they work in assembly, it's like so few, it's super important. We need assembly, but very few people actually know the language or know how to work with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand now. I'm
just trying to see if that's a good, that's something you can get from asking the research, the education level, if that's something you would want to know.
I mean, potentially you can make sophisticated segmentation of your market, and to make a link between person who is a doctorate and using specific testing tool, for example. Yes, you can. I mean, you could potentially use this in marketing and communication to convince them to use a specific message, to convince them to use your application instead of competitors. That's how I would use it.
Okay, cool.
All right, so now we have questions.
We have them. We're ready.
Yes. Are we ready? Do you want to ask users?
I'm ready.
Okay. So we have questions. So technically, we are ready to start your research. But now, understand this: even the best researcher won't get questions right the first time. You're most likely gonna make a mistake while working on your research questions. So because of that, you, before actually sending this survey to all of your users, you would likely ask your friends who are not necessarily being a target group for the research, but technical enough to understand what I'm talking about, and conduct the study with them.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What if I don't have friends?
I'm very sorry for you.
Okay.
I am very sorry for you.
Okay.
Well, then you can, if you have an option like this, you can target the survey to very limited number of people and conduct this survey on actual users. And from the quality of answers, you can see whether the questions are right. So if you see answers and you see like, oh, this is not what I actually asked for, or I don't really need this information, like then you go back to research questions like, how this is going to help me, the answers that I am seeing, are they actually helping me get to answer the research questions? This is where you get direct feedback, whether the questions that you constructed are helping you with the actual research. So after that, yeah.
Well, I'm wondering. So let's say 50% of the people are not completing the questionnaire. Okay.
Mhm.
Should I create another questionnaire to find out why people aren't answering the first questionnaire?
that that feels like a closed feedback loop. How would you know that the second
How would you improve the first questionnaire? It's a good open-ended question.
I don't think how would you know the second half gonna answer the second questionnaire?
How do I know? How do I know that they're going to?
Yeah, that they will even like consider answering the other
The
one.
second one. Well, that's the well. Here's the thing: if only 15% of people start filling that out, then we can start.
Oh my God. No, don't consider that you're gonna have like more than 10-ish% responses. 10%, that's huge. Like if you get 10% of your population to answer questions on your survey, that's huge.
Listen, listen. I go out to bars. Okay, I go out. I try to talk to girls. Trust me when I say 1% success, 0.5% success is amazing. I've got plenty of quantitative research. Okay, don't worry about
Okay. I conducted a couple of online surveys.
Uh-huh.
And I think my highest rate was around 30%. That's not very much. 4%.
4%. And this is how many people are getting this survey? 1,000?
The whole population, like everyone. I would just cut off the responses, the survey after 1,000.
You said the whole population?
The whole population, no, the whole population of my application.
Okay. I was
not the whole population of the planet.
My mom got this.
You said this population of my application.
Okay.
So the highest so far, if I remember, that was a couple of years ago, but if I remember correctly, I think it was around 4%, and I was very happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how small percentage of people are actually willing to conduct online surveys if you are not paying them to do so.
You can ever pay people?
I mean, it's quite often to offer participants some form of compensation for their time, but usually do this during user interviews, when you do have a direct contact to the person, when you talk to the person through an IDI in-depth interview, or if you invite them for a focus group interview, not necessarily for surveys.
Got it. Okay. Cool.
So then you conduct the research. When you correct your questions, you conduct the research. You corrected the question. Then I already mentioned this because you asked before. Don't remember to explain what is the purpose of the survey before you start the survey. That's usually like the introduction of the survey. When you tell the user the goal is this, we want to learn that, and it's gonna take as much time. It's actually quite important to tell how much time answering the survey is gonna take, so the user can prepare. Because if you predict, or you don't put prediction how much time it's gonna take, and the participant will run out of time to answer those questions, then they will abandon this the survey, and you're gonna get lower rate. But if you say, oh, the survey is gonna take 15 minutes or 20 minutes, they can actually prepare and, for example, postpone answering the survey like an hour or something until they are actually ready. So it's actually important to tell them how long it's gonna take, And then you ask the questions, the survey, and after that, you also should always remember to thank them for participation in the survey. Like, being just human being and thanking people for doing a job for you. So that's something that you always should remember.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, when we're done with that, I mean, now we get to dig into it, right? We get to.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why I went like this. Let's cut that. Let's cut that out. Please cut this part out.
So this is the not always, but usually it is the fastest part of the user research, is the data analysis and reporting, the presentation of the data. So every research eventually have to be analyzed and then reported back to the stakeholders, decision makers, or whoever asked you to do this research. So you start analyzing the data with always looking at the research goal, the research questions that we defined at the beginning. So you remember what was the question. So when you're analyzing the answer, you're analyzing to answer those questions. It's not the same as leaning towards one answer or another. It's about making sure that you are actually answering the question, the research question that you planned for. Then you seek patterns in this data. You seek patterns in user responses, so you can learn about their attitudes or motivations for, in our case, motivations for using protocol buffers, or attitudes towards the tools they are using or workflows that they are using. You answer each of the questions separately using the collected data. And usually you would put some quotes captured in the responses while answering those questions. So you have question number one: who is our audience? What is the segmentation of the market? So you present your data, your finding, and you support it by using quotes that some people said this, other people said this. And then you create a report that you eventually going to present to the stakeholders. You have your each research question answered with highlights from the survey. Then the next step is to put your recommendations. So you have the research questions, you have the data, you analyze the data, you have found patterns, and you understand user attitudes and motivations. Then you can suggest some actions. You give your recommendation as a researcher. What you think after spending so much time with the users, what do you think should happen next? Like what the decision should be made. And after that, after like having the question answered and recommendation, after that you can actually put some more detailed data that support the recommendation. So this is when you can support your recommendation that 45% of our customers, of the population, pointed out to use Postman as their API testing tool. And if that somehow relates to your answer to your research question, that's how you confirm that your recommendation has base in data.
Got it. Okay. So I would have, my first thought would have been to show the data first and then recommend a decision. But you're saying do the decision first. Is that because you want them to just know where you're going, where you're leading them in the first place, instead of having them being like, all right, where is this leading me?
So it's about the executive's mindset. Executives, it's not true all around the planet. In different cultures, this is actually different. But here in America, the executive's mindset is usually show me the solution, and then if I ask, show me why. So you show the results first, so question answered and recommendation, And then if they are interested in the data supporting it, then you have it later on. It's just, this is how executives work, at least in the US.
Got it. Do you have an opinion about if you were a decision maker, what you would want to hear first?
Remember that executives are usually very busy people. They usually have meetings all the way from the morning down to the evening in your calendar. If you would spend every meeting getting into those details, you wouldn't get any job done. You trust your people to do this for you. That's why you have, a number of people in your organization that you call specialists, and you trust them that they do their job as they should. So you trust them that the researcher did the job they should have done, the way how they should have done. So as a executives, you can go deep into data. Like if your intuition tells you that something is wrong, then you can get into the data just to make your own mind. But usually that's not really necessary.
Gotcha. All right. I think we kind of covered it, didn't we?
I think so, yeah. I've done this process a couple of times, and I think we didn't miss anything.
Okay, great. Well, this is exciting because, I think this is kind of where a lot of people should start. Even like, this is such a great way to structure, just asking good questions. This is a very like science-based way of thinking about things, and I love the way we're breaking it down. And I'm certainly going to try and find ways to use this somehow, because I think it's useful. So thank you for sharing all your experience so far, and letting me ask some questions and get involved. I think this was really fun for me, hopefully for the audience too. And if anyone out there has questions of their own, please go down to the comments. We want to see them. We want to read them. We will get involved down there. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos coming out. And Pavel, did you want to say anything else before we head out?
No, I'm good. Thanks for watching us, and let's keep in touch.
All right. I love it. Big tech talks. We will come back at you next time with more great tech info. See you guys next time.